Hello and welcome to Blender Masterclass by Syed Zeerak Hussain Gillani. Today is the first lecture of Blender Masterclass. What we will be covering in the first lecture. So, the lecture 1 contents are installing the Blender, adding basic objects, interacting with the interface, and using transforms. In the end of the lecture, I will be giving you a challenge which you will have to do yourself so that you can test what you have learned in this lecture. So let's start with first of all installing the Blender. So here we go. To install Blender, you have two options. You can just go, wait a minute. To install Blender, you have two options. You can go to www.szhgdesigning, which is our website. Once opened, you may go to Blender course. In Blender course, you may go to prerequisites. In prerequisites, scroll down to bottom where you will have an option to download Blender. Once that clicked, you will be able to download Blender. So will be I doing. The Blender download starts. Okay, so once the Blender has been downloaded, you can just open that file. No problem if you have any previous version installed. You will not have any hindrance in using this version. Accept the terms and conditions and install it. It will take 2 to 3 minutes in some cases. Click on Finish button, go to your desktop, refresh the desktop, go to Windows, and in Recently Added, you will get Blender. Now pin it to the taskbar. You will get two Blenders if you have a previous version already pinned to the taskbar. Unpin it and take Blender. So here is the newest version of Blender for free for you. Let the Blender open. Yes, so here we are. This is the newest Blender 2.92.0. You will be learning the newest Blender. So you save the settings, and once you have installed Blender, you will start a general file. So what we have covered installing Blender. The next objective of our today's lecture is adding basic objects. To add basic objects, first of all, you have to need a .blend file. To make a .blend file in which you can make 3D items, you just have to press General. Once you have pressed General, you will be introduced to this screen. I am going to full screen it. First of all, let me turn on my show off so you can see what buttons am I pressing. So turn on show off. So now you will be able, just as I clicked left button, you know on this left hand corner of the screen that I pressed left button. I pressed right button and you know that I pressed right button. I press space bar, so it shows I have pressed space bar. So you will be getting every input that I give to the program, and I will be talking out that too. So in window, I will go to toggle full screen. So now I have only Blender on my screen and no other distractions than that. So the first objective of our lecture today is how to add simple objects into the interface. So as a tradition, a culture, we delete the default cube. For deleting the default cube, I just press the delete key on my keyboard. After that, I press Shift plus A. When I press Shift plus A, this menu pops up. This menu can also be accessed by pressing Add here or Shift A. By pressing Shift A, I am able to access all these different kinds of mesh. We will be creating all of our 3D elements and objects from these mesh. You have a lot of options here. You have mesh, you have curves, you have surfaces, you have metaballs, you have text, you have volumes, you have grease pencil, armature, lattice, empty. Empty is one of the most important part of Blender once you get to the imaging part or mirroring part. You have images, lights, light probes, cameras, speakers, force fields, and collection instances. Collection instances, you make your own collections of objects in the Blender. So again, we will press Shift A to access the Add menu. In Add menu, because we are going to add objects, all the objects are mesh. In mesh, we will go and add a cube. We can delete this. Again, press Shift A and we can add a plane. We can delete this, Shift A, and we can add a circle. You see that circle is a 2D image here. Again, you press Delete, you press Shift A, and you can add a UV sphere, or what we call a sphere. You delete that, you press Shift A, and you add an icosphere. You delete that, and you can add any of the mesh mentioned here. You can add a monkey. You delete that. We will start off by adding a cube. So now we know that how to add objects to our interface. This is our 3D viewport. This around which I am moving my mouse is our 3D viewport. This is the object we are going to work on. This is the camera. This is the light. We will be able to add as much as cameras as we want and as much as lights as we want in our scene. But as we start in the basic 3D viewport, we get one camera and one light. We can add more cameras by pressing Shift A and selecting camera from here. And we can add more lights by pressing Shift A and going to light menu, and we will be able to access more than 4 types of lights here. I say more than 4 types because once they have been added to the viewport, they can be modified further. But that will be a further part of our course, so let's leave it here. So here we have just covered the first part of the course, first part of today's lecture, in which we learned how to add objects. So let's cut off adding objects from our list. After that, we will be moving the interface. To move the interface, you have a lot of options. First of all, you can see this gizmo here, this one. So we have different axes in Blender. As this is a 3D viewport, which means there are 3 dimensions available in the viewport. One of the dimensions is the y-axis, one of the dimension is the x-axis, and one of the dimension is z-axis. So you can get an x-axis view from here. I just pressed on this x here. You can move to y, you can move to z, you can move to x again. These are just 2D perspectives of the viewport. To access the 3D perspectives of the viewport, to access the 3D aspects or perspectives of the viewport, click the middle mouse button and move it. Once you move the middle mouse button, click and hold the middle mouse button and then move the mouse, and you can see that you can go anywhere in the viewport. you can get any perspective of the viewport. While I am moving the viewport, you can see that the gizmo that I highlighted before is also moving. So now I am on the top. Now I am on the front y-axis. Now I am on the front x-axis. Now I am the back of the x-axis. Now I am the back of the y-axis. Now I am at the bottom of our object. So I can view my object from any perspective, from any point. Now you must be wondering that how can I get closer to my object? To get closer to your object, you just have to scroll your mouse button further or backwards. Further or backwards. By doing this, you can go zoom in. By scrolling your mouse upwards, you go into the viewport. By scrolling your mouse outwards, you go outward from the viewport. I am referring everything with a 3-button pointing device. You can go very well on a laptop with a keyboard. The keyboard of a laptop is very fine for using with Blender, but the mouse or the trackpad of the laptop is not very fine with the Blender. You can get a simple 3-button pointing device with a mouse with a right button, left button, and a middle mouse button. You can get that mouse very cheap in the market. You can get one mouse, USB connected mouse, or any connection which you have available on your computer or your laptop, and you can use that mouse, you can use that pointing device, and it will be very helpful for you to work when you will be working with complex materials. Working with small materials is fine with the trackpad, but once you move to a little bit complex materials or meshes, a trackpad fails. So you have to use a 3-button pointing device or a handheld mouse for using Blender. This will be the only investment I think that you will have to make, which we will have to use the Blender. So this was our zoom in, zoom out, and moving around your object. I am moving around my object by using middle mouse button and then moving my mouse. I am zooming in by scrolling up. I am zooming out by scrolling down. Now, if I want to change my view, if I want to go from right to left only, what would I do? If I want to go from right to left of the viewport, I don't want to move like this. I don't want to move like this. But I want to move like this. How would I do that? To do that, you simply have to hold your shift, any shift button on your keyboard, hold shift button and then press the middle mouse button. By holding and pressing left shift or any shift button on your keyboard and holding and pressing the middle mouse button and then moving the mouse in left or right direction, you will be able to move the viewport in up, down, anyway, but in 2D perspective. If you are not holding and pressing shift, then you will be moving the viewport in 3D mode. To move the viewport in 2D mode, you press and hold shift button and press and hold middle mouse button and then move your mouse, and you will be moving in 2D viewport. So this was how to interact and move your interface. So the second content of our lecture today is covered, in which we learned how to move the viewport, how to add objects. To move objects, you can also use this hand button made here. It will also move the viewport in 2D mode. So you press and hold this hand button and then move your mouse and you will be moving in 2D mode. You can zoom in and out by pressing and holding this plus button, this magnifier button, and then moving your mouse upwards will zoom in and moving your mouse outwards will zoom out. So you can also use these features from here, but using it from your mouse is much more easier and much more productive when you are working with complex meshes. The third part of today's lecture is transforming. What are transforms? How do we transform our objects? You see that every 3D model which we see is basically not or never a cube. So how do we transform our cube? To transform our cube, by transforming we mean scaling it, moving it, and rotating it. To scale, move, and rotate, there are small shortcuts, shortkeys, or hotkeys, whatever you may call them. But there are some keys on the keyboard which let you move and transform your object. So what are those keys? What are those keys? Those keys are, if you want to move your object in the 3D viewport, you select that object which you want to use. You might be wondering that what is this? This right here. This is the global center. This is the global center. It does not move anywhere unless you want it to. If you want it to move, it can move, but it stays here in the best case scenario. So to move any mesh, you select that mesh first of all. After that, after selecting that mesh, to move anything, you have to grab it. So you can remember this, that when you have to grab anything, you just press G button. G for grab. Once you have selected the mesh you want to move, press G to grab it. Now you can move this anywhere in the viewport. You can take it here, you can take it here, you can take it here. It goes out of the viewport because the viewport is limited by these constraints. You can zoom out and the viewport will be an infinite space. So you can move it anywhere in the viewport, but you don't want to move it without any constraints. But now that you have moved it, you don't know how to set it back to the origin. So until you have not implemented the movement, you just press right click and it goes back to center. To move it on any specific axis, because this is a 3D viewport, so you have 3 different axes on which you can move your object. To move it on any specific axis, you can just grab it, and if you want, suppose you want to move it on the red line, the x-axis, you just press X on your keyboard and the X line will be highlighted. Now you will be only able to move your mesh on the x-axis. If you press left click here, your mesh will stay here. But if you haven't clicked the left click yet, then you can press right click to move it back to the center. Now you have it here. To get it back on the origin, you just press Ctrl Z. Ctrl Z means undo. So we just undid what we did. If we want to move it on y-axis, then we press G and Y. We press G and then we press Y. Now it is constrained to the y-axis, so we can move it on y-axis only. You press your mouse anywhere, but it will translate to only Y motion. So I press left click, right click, and it will go back to center. If you want it to move on Z axis, then you will press G and then you will press Z. Once you press Z, your mesh is now locked to Z axis and it will only move on Z axis. I will press right click and it will go back because I haven't clicked left click so that it stays here. Now you must be wondering that either it only moves on one axis, and if it has moved on one axis, will it move on another axis? So the answer is yes. If you want to move it 1 block or 1 meter on x-axis and then 1 meter on y-axis and then 1 meter on z-axis, what will you do? You will just press G and then you want to move it 1 meter on x-axis, so you press X and then from the numbers you press 1. So it moves 1 block or 1 meter, as meter is the unit used in Blender. The block moves 1 meter on the x-axis. You press left click to confirm the action. You want to move the block, the mesh on y-axis now. So what you do is press G for grabbing, and then Y for locking into the y-axis, and then press 1. What it does is now move it 1 meter on the y-axis, and you press left click to lock it in place. Now you want to move it 1 meter on the z-axis, on the positive z-axis. So you grab it again, press Z, and you press 1. So it has moved 1 meter on z-axis now. How can you confirm that it has only moved 1 and 1 meter on the viewport? When you select any mesh or object, this icon right here pops up. This is the properties, these are the properties of the mesh. So you can see that in location, X has moved 1 meter, Y has moved 1 meter, and Z has also moved only 1 meter. To send it back to center, you can just zero this, and zero this out, and it has moved back to the center, 0, 0, 0 position. Now let's say that you want to rotate this cube, because rotating is a major part of modeling. So to rotate, you press R. Till now you might have seen that there are no extraordinary shortcuts or keys which are related to some movements. So if you want to grab an object, you just press G. You want to rotate an object, you just press R. So you can rotate this object in any way possible. But you may see that I am having problems with rotating it, because it is rotating in any way the interface is understanding the moving. So I don't want to do that. I want to rotate it in the way I want it to. So if I want it to rotate on only y-axis, I will press R and then I will press Y. So now this is locked and it will only rotate on y-axis. I will press right click to undo that, because I haven't confirmed it yet. So then I want to rotate it on x-axis. So I press R to start rotation and then press X to lock it on x-axis. Now I am moving it on only x-axis. Now I again press right click so that what I have done does not happen. So now I want to rotate it on z-axis. I press R and then I press Z. Now I can move it on z-axis only. It will not move anywhere on any other axis, but only on z-axis. I again press right click to undo that or unconfirm that. Now I want it to be rotated 45 degrees on x-axis, 45 degrees on y-axis, and 45 degrees on z-axis. One way to do that is press R, press X. Now it will only rotate on x-axis, and then I will type from the numpad 45, and it has been rotated. To confirm that I pressed enter, or I could have pressed left click on my mouse. Now it has rotated it 45 degrees on the x-axis. Now I want to rotate the already 45 degree rotated mesh on x-axis. I want to rotate it further 45 degrees on the y-axis. So what do I do? To do it, I just press R and then I press Y. Now it is locked on the y-axis. I type 45 in and then press enter, or I click the left click, and it has now been rotated on x-axis by 45 and on y-axis by 45. Now I want to rotate this condition. I rotate this mesh then on z-axis. To do that, I will just press R and then I will press Z, and then I will type in 45 and press enter or use left mouse button to confirm that. Now I have a mesh which is rotated 45 degrees on all three axes. The one way to do this was which I just showed you. The second way to do this is through the properties panel. You can go to the properties panel and you can, let me first do that 0, tab 0, zap 0, and we have all of them on 0. So to rotate all of rotate 45 degrees on all of the axes, I can just put in my 45 here, 45 here, and 45 here, and you can see that I have the same result as I had before. So now we have gone through locating it, which means moving it in the 3D viewport, and now we have also gone through rotating it, which means rotating it through the 3D viewport. We have moved its position and we have rotated it. Now what we want to do is make it bigger or smaller. To do that, it is also very easy. First of all, to easy all the things, I will turn the rotations back to 0. Yes, so here we go. This is our mesh. We want to scale it by 2 meters on the x-axis. What will we do? To scale, we press S. Once we have pressed S, we can move our mouse upwards or downwards to scale it on the whole. You just press S and you drag your mouse outwards and it will start getting bigger. And you can drag your mouse back inwards and it will start getting smaller. You can take it to the point. You can make it that big that you enter it. So we will make it. I just pressed right mouse button to lock it in place back. Now we only want it to be bigger on the x-axis. So what will we do to rotate it only on x-axis? To scale it on, to scale it only on x-axis. To scale it only on x-axis, you press S and then you press X. Now when you will move your mouse inwards and outwards, you will see that the mesh is only getting bigger and smaller on the x-axis. To unconfirm that, I press right key. Now to scale it on the y-axis, I will press S and then I will press Y. What it will do is allow me to scale it on only y-axis. You can see that I am moving my mouse and it is getting bigger and smaller on only y-axis. When I press right click, it will go back to its original form. Now if I want to scale it on z-axis, what will I do? I will answer. When I ask you a question, please answer it in your own mind so that you can check that whether are you learning it or you are just watching it. So what will I do to scale it on z-axis? I will press the S button and then I will press the Z button. Now it is going to allow me to scale it only on z-axis, and here we have our new Xbox. So I pressed the left click and it locked it into the form. When you press left click, it confirms the action you just applied on the mesh. So now we have covered that how to change the position of the cube, how to rotate the cube, and how to scale the cube or any mesh which is available to you. Let's delete this and press Shift A to add another mesh, and let's get a UV sphere or a sphere, a ball. You can see that it is round from all the sides. So let's get here. Now let me show you that I can scale it on the x-axis and it will be like a medicine, a pill, and I can scale it on y-axis. I can scale it on z-axis. I can scale it on z-axis. And let me tell you one thing, you don't have to confuse yourself if your actions are not being performed, or if the buttons which you are pressing are not performing any action on the screen. You may have to check your cursor. If your cursor is somewhere here in the properties section, then when you will apply any button, you will press any button, nothing will happen in the 3D viewport. To To confirm any action in 3D viewport, you have to take your cursor into the 3D viewport. Once you have taken your cursor into the 3D viewport, now you will press the keys and they will perform actions. So what I do is I press S on keyboard to scale the mesh, and then I pressed Z to scale it on Z axis, and I enlarged it a bit. Now I think that I should rotate it on y-axis by 90 degrees. What should I do to rotate this mesh on y-axis by 90 degrees? To do that, I will press R, and then to lock it on y-axis, I will press Y, and then to rotate it 90 degrees, I will just type in 90 and then press enter or use my left click to lock it in. Now I have a mesh which has been transformed on z-axis. We have scaled it on z-axis, and then we have rotated it on y-axis. Now let's move it on x-axis by 5 meters. We moved it on x-axis by 5 meters. You may confuse it that when we first moved things on y-axis, they were moving like this, but now it moved like this. Why is that? It is because we just move our 3D viewport. If we move it back here, then it will have moved back here. If we moved it like this, then it would have like in this way. You can also move the objects into the negative side. So you can grab it on x-axis and then move it to -5. By pressing -5, it goes back to origin because we have already moved it 5 meters on the x-axis. Now to take it further back, we just grab it on x-axis by -5 and it will go -5 to confirm that I press my enter key. So now we have learned how to enter various objects or meshes into the 3D viewport, how to change their position, how to transform them by scaling them or rotating them. So now that we have gone through this tutorial, I will put forward a challenge for you. The challenge for you is to start a .blend file. Once you have started that .blend file, I challenge you to move the cube 1 meter on the z-axis. Once you have moved the cube on the z-axis, I challenge you to scale it on y-axis by 1 meter. When you have scaled it 1 meter on the y-axis, then I challenge you to rotate it on the x-axis by 45 degrees. So this is your challenge. Please play around with the controls so you can get better out of your challenge. This was the first lecture from Syed Zeerak Hussain Gillani in Blender Masterclass. I hope it went well and you have learned a lot out of it. I will be coming back with a new lecture in 1 or 2 days. Until then, goodbye.